Like, I think the reality of Monero mining, I haven't looked into it in quite a while, but I think there's this kind of utopian vision that, Monero mining would be everyone just turning on their CPUs, and we'll have this like kind of, party where it's all of the users that are mining. But I think you still have a high amount of centralization around mining farms, in particular areas where electricity is extremely cheap and hardware can be got extremely cheap as well. So that would be kind of closer to the sources, closer to kind of cheaper electricity sources and cheaper hardware sources. So I think you probably still see some centralization around the Asia area, which tends to be the area where regulations are more stronger against privacy. So what you may see is some of those miners turning off their hash power and the hash power for the network being reduced, which makes it potentially easier to attack in the future. But I think what we're more likely to see if there is a real move against privacy coins is an abandonment from institutional actors. So those exchanges that do still serve Monero transactions, kind of moving away from Monero transactions. I think that's probably the more likely effect, rather than it destroying the mining network completely, because there's always people that will be willing to risk.
This week on Monero Talk is sponsored by Cake Wallet. Store, send, receive, and exchange your Monero and Bitcoin safely on iOS and Android too. Cake Wallet is open source, and you always control your own keys. And by StealthEX, an instant exchange where privacy is the top concern. Go to stealthex.io to instantly exchange between Monero and 450 plus assets without having to create an account or register, and with no limits, making StealthEX a simple way to purchase Monero with crypto anonymously. Monero Talk is also made possible from contributions by viewers and listeners like you. And supporting us is easier than ever. By typing in monerotalk.crypto in your monero.com or Cake Wallet send address field to send us a tip.
This week on Monero Talk, Douglas Tuman interviews Kee Jefferys, CTO of Session and Oxen. The two discuss the recent improvements and new features of the Session messaging app, how self-hosting data changes content moderation, the architecture of Oxen and how it relates to Monero, proof of stake versus proof of work, miner centralization and the risk of 51% attacks, the potential implications of a regularly crackdown on privacy technologies, the different use cases of Lokinet, and much more. Monero Talk starts now.
All right. Kee, what's going on, man? Welcome to Monero Talk.
Yeah, great to be here, or great to be back as well, because I had a look at the recording from last time. It was nearly a year ago. So yeah, it's good to be back and tell your audience what I've been up to and talk about privacy, which is always good to talk about.
Now, I know we had you on like a year ago on Monerotalk, but I think we had you on like a long time ago on Monero Talk, right?
Like, yeah, it may have been
like
I don't even know the
first launch type thing, or like you were working on Lokinet at the time.
Yeah, we're still working on Lokinet, but yeah, I think you were saying before, I think we met in 2019 at like some sort of consensus related party.
Yeah, that was the Monero after party, the New York City Monero after party, where people bought their tickets anonymously with Monero, putting their emails and the payment IDs. Oh man, we were so young and so dumb.
Yeah, I still remember you had a big LED Monero related sign, I think, in the room as well.
Yeah, that sounds about right. That was fun. Yeah. That was a fun party, right?
That was good. Yeah, there were a lot of the Monero like people were there as well. I think Ricardo was around at that point, like at the party, I think.
Yeah, Ricardo was there. I think Peter Todd was there, or he was there. That might have been a different party. You're coming down to Monerotopia, right? I mean, we have you down as a speaker. All right, because you're coming from far.
Yep. All the way from fucking Melbourne, Australia to Mexico City. So bit of a journey, but yeah, I'll be there.
Very excited to have you. And you guys are having like, didn't you just have like your version of a hurricane over there?
A cyclone?
Yeah. Did you guys just have one?
I don't know. I don't follow the news.
Oh my god!
Straight up, but
I just heard it on like Bloomberg Radio on my way over here.
Yeah, usually they happen up in Queensland, or like Western Australia or something like that. But yeah, I'm looking at the news now. Yeah. Well, they said tropical cyclone Ilsa downgraded. Okay, so maybe it won't be as bad as. Yeah, it's in Western Australia, which Australia is fucking huge. So
yeah, you don't really like us Americans don't really realize. So yeah, man. So when we met the first time, or when you were on, and then on Monero Talk the first time, is that when did Oxen did it start as Oxen, or did you start? I think you were originally working on Lokinet, right?
Well, yeah, the coin project originally started as Loki.
Right.
Lokinet is Lokinet is a kind of a different project we've been working on under the Loki banner. But yeah, in 2018 we started under the name Loki, and then probably in 2019, late 2019, we launched Session. We were working on Lokinet at that point. But I think it was around 2020 that we rebranded from the coin being called Loki to Oxen. But we kept the whole old chain history and all of that. So the chain has effectively been going since, I think, mid 2018, and the project was founded in early 2018.
All right. What does Oxen mean? Like, what is the? I don't know.
Well, I mean, Oxens are related to like bulls, so
it's the oxen animal. Okay, I was it's something else. I wasn't sure. Okay.
Yeah.
So why'd you guys any reason why you named it after an oxen?
Well, I think at that point we wanted to get away from the name Loki because that was when the Marvel like series was like really kicking off and was really destroying our searchability. Like before then, you used to be able to search up Loki and it would come up with the coin, but like, you know, when Marvel launches a TV show that's also called Loki, it really makes it much harder to find.
So
stuff
like,
about
nobody's Googling oxen, so we'll use them.
Well, yeah, I think one of the marketing guys came up with it, but was like, you know, oxes are strong and they like power like farms. Like you can attach kind of other farm machinery to them. They like, you know, really strong, bullish kind of animals. So I think that was part of the narrative for why we chose it. And Oxen is also like the powerhouse for the rest of the products we built, Session and Lokinet. So yeah, that was kind of some of the logic, I think.
I know we're rehashing things we've had you on talk, but if you don't mind, just because people might be listening in for the first time, what was the impetus for starting what was then called Loki, which became Oxen? Like, why didn't you just work on Monero protocol? What was your drive? Like, what made you start this entire venture?
Yeah, so in 2018, we were kind of swimming around the Monero space quite a bit. I was doing actually like talks at our local blockchain center about Monero. We cared a lot about privacy at that point in time, and we still really do. But we saw these protocols swimming around. Mostly it was Monero and Tor that we were really interested in, and a bit of Signal as well. So we saw these three protocols and we were like, wouldn't it be kind of cool? Because Tor has this network of nodes that it uses to route traffic around the internet. Wouldn't it be kind of cool if we could incentivize the operation of those nodes financially, and use that to kind of bootstrap this network where you could have a second layer of private communication? So you could build something like Tor with incentivized nodes, or you could build something like Signal where the messages weren't stored on a central server, they were stored on this decentralized network of nodes. And that was like really an important idea at that time. So we thought maybe we could build this on top of Monero. But I think when we looked at the project, it didn't seem super open to building a second layer of nodes. So for example, like what we were kind of proposing was to build almost like a master-node network where some of the block rewards for Monero would be taken and given to this network to incentivize their operation. But I think Monero has always had like a strong philosophical view about what the consensus layer should look like and who block rewards should go to. So I don't think there was much flexibility there to propose kind of like a second layer like masternode network that was incentivized at the protocol level. So at that point, I think it became clear that we would need to do our own chain, and that's when we kind of launched Oxen and built the second layer of nodes, which I think is about 1,800 service nodes right now, which are incentivized by the network, and perform all of the operations for Session and Lokinet and do all of that cool stuff. So
yeah, man, you've come a long way from when we first saw. I mean, it was like basically vaporware when we were first talking about it.
Yeah.
Like, how's this thing gonna work? How the node's gonna be incentivized? And shit, man, I think you've more than proven yourself, especially with Session, right? I mean, Session it's like known beyond crypto, right? Like a lot of people are just using it, not even, I think, really even knowing or understanding that it's, backed by Oxen essentially. It's just a very usable encrypted messenger.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. And how many users do you guys have right now?
Well, I think we're up from our previous estimate, because I think I don't know exactly what I said last time we were on here, but I think a year ago we were probably kicking around 400,000, 350,000 monthly active users. But I just checked recently, and I think we're just pushing 600,000 monthly active users now.
Holy
so
shit.
Yeah, and what you said is right. Like, a lot of these users don't necessarily know that there's a blockchain network powering what they're using day to day, which is actually like one of the goals that we kind of set out to do, which was to kind of separate the complexity of blockchain from like the consumer application that people were actually going to use. I think we want to bridge those together a bit more now, but like getting people onboarded, you don't want to. I think, getting people onboarded onto a messaging application, if you just like kind of push blockchain on them too hard, they'll get a bit like worried about what's going on, or like, the complexity of blockchain can also be quite overwhelming sometimes. So it's good to kind of take that and put that into a second layer kind of onboarding for the user.
Yeah, no, it seems like it's worked out quite well for you. I was gonna try to go through Oxen, but we're at Session, so let's just keep talking about Session, and then we'll go back. We'll jump around. I guess what can you tell us about kind of like where Session currently is in terms of its tech and where you guys are headed with it?
Yeah, so I would say, like, compared to other messaging applications, like, your mainline messaging applications, Telegram, Signal, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, Session is still quite early. Like, we're only, I think at this point, 3 years old or 3.5 years old, and most of the messaging applications are pushing on 10 years old. So yeah, like Telegram, I think maybe a slight bit younger than the rest of them, but yeah, I mean, Signal's pushing 10 years old. WhatsApp's pushing 10 years old. So they've had a lot of time to develop like their systems and features. And messaging applications are like extremely complex pieces of software. We expect them to do a lot, and we have very low tolerance for failures as well. If a message doesn't get delivered to a recipient, it's like the messaging app just gets dumped, basically. So there's like a very high ceiling for like the level that we need to reach. And Session's definitely not there yet, but it's getting better every week. And people who use Session 2 years ago or a year ago and download it today will definitely notice that there's been a difference. It's just basically like being on that warpath and like putting in features, improving reliability that we need to like really keep hammering on. And it's something that we've gotten much better at in the past couple of years. So I mean, yeah, since a year ago, I noted down some features we've added like theming, so people can choose like a custom theme like that they want to have. That was really important for us. Emoji reacts, which was a very highly requested feature. ID blinding, which basically preserves kind of more of your privacy when you're chatting in larger communities. And then we've also upgraded voice and video calls since we last spoke. So yeah, quite a few features coming out, and probably the biggest features yet to come this year in the next couple of months as well. So improvements to disappearing messages and closed groups as well, which are these kind of smaller groups. So yeah, lots to come, but still, like, we're not all the way there yet.
Yes. So tell us about the different, like, so obviously peer, just individual groups, that's all like completely private. It's peer to peer essentially. And then you have these small groups, and then you have the larger groups, right? What are technically, what's the difference? What's the differences?
Yeah. So I like to think about it like closed groups are kind of more like they're more secure and decentralized. So they're actually stored on the service node network. All of the messages are stored on the service node network for closed groups, and they can scale up to 100 people. And essentially, what they're providing is kind of the full level, onion routing, the full level decentralized storage, and everything is on the service node network. Now, with the larger groups, it becomes a bit like your model becomes a bit more interesting, because in small groups, you do want an end-to-end encrypted, so everyone is end-to-end encrypting their messages for each other.
Mm-hmm.
But with larger groups, when it gets up to 500 people, for example, it doesn't really like
Public
a lot of
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of people are going to have like an immediate reaction to this is just encrypt everything, but end-to-end encryption doesn't really make sense in a group of 500 people, because and if the group is open as well and anyone can join it with the URL, it doesn't really make sense to end-to-end encrypt the data, because anyone can join the group, read the messages, or your group size is so large that you can't really monitor if someone has snuck their way into a group. And is exfiltrating messages. So when we get to that larger size, it's more important to have scalability. So at that point, we have a model where you kind of self-host a server, and then you can start a community with that server. The community can have a number of rooms. It's probably more similar to the Discord model, or having channels in Telegram. And essentially all of the messages flow to that self-hosted server. They still flow through onion requests, so you still get that anonymity for the users that are joining your group, but you don't get that decentralization in the storage aspect of things. It is all stored on that self-hosted server that the user sets up. But that allows us to scale to thousands and thousands of users. Our biggest open groups have grown past 10,000 users at points, and not have any issues with scalability. So.
And I guess at least in that scenario, somebody who's running a group, at least it's being stored on your servers versus, say, Telegram servers, which are then, more easily acquired by the powers that be, right? Anybody that wants to get their hands on that information. I guess
100%.
Depending how you run your own server, but you could probably do it in a way where it's pretty safe and secure and out of the hands of those that want to get their hands on the data, right?
Yeah, it's really important for moderation as well. If all of the data is held by the operating service like Facebook or Telegram, then they'll have certain requirements to operate on that data. They may have to screen it for, terrorism material or unfriendly material, or they apply their own content moderation policies essentially to that data that they're holding, because they're holding it. But decentralizing that hosting means that the content moderation policy is up to the person who's actually hosting the messages there. So that really allows us to be much more flexible with, political content, for example. Like, Twitter and Facebook would have to take certain measures, as we've seen over the last 2-3 years, that individual service node operators can decide what content moderation policies that they're going to apply to their own servers.
Yeah, as we're having this convo, I'm realizing I think it is time that we set up a session room for Monerotopia. So we were using Telegram because we started it, I don't know, 2 years ago, right? I never really paid much attention to it, but now there's quite a few people in there. And then people are like, oh, why are we using shitty Telegram, privacy community, Monero community, we should be using Session was brought up, obviously, a year ago. And I was like, well, the large groups, my understanding was it's you might as well use it's a public forum. So why would, but now for all these other reasons you're talking about, right? If we're running it as our own server, we are gaining authority over our own chat room, and we're keeping it out of the hands of a corporation or a government in terms of them being able to essentially control the room, right? And set the rules, and like you said, potentially have to scan the data or whatever for their reasons. So I'm now convinced. So I'm going to maybe go through that process and maybe is it easy enough to do? Like what are the steps to set up a room like that?
Yeah, it's fairly simple. I mean, if you've set up a Monero full node, for example, it would be easy for you. Basically, you just grab a VPS, punch in a couple of commands, and you can get a node up and running. And then that'll basically give you a URL that you can put into the session client and join up. Like, we tried to streamline the process as much as possible. I mean, you still do need a VPS to do this. We want to move into the direction where everything can be done inside of the session client. So I know, like, a lot of the larger kind of self-hosted services, like Matrix, Elements, have their, like, if you go to their website, they'll have services where you can just kind of basically one click to set up your own VPS with a Matrix like instance on it, or an Element instance on it. So we eventually want to get to that point where you just pay some provider, like, $10 a month or something, and then you get your own little server and you can decide how you want to administer everything. But it's all kind of handled nicely through a GUI interface. It's not there yet, but that's a place where we want to get to eventually. But yeah, if you know a open group operator, like, I can put you in touch with some people. They can just create a room on their server, and then you can join theirs. And if you like, especially if it's someone in the community that you trust, like, then you can just move all of your users over there, and it doesn't necessarily need to be related to their open group as well, like, because rooms show up as separate channels. They don't show up. It's not kind of like Discord where there's a server and then all of the rooms are underneath that server. It's more like there's a server and they each have individual channels which just show up floating in the application.
Do you have any like big groups like that we would like big privacy groups? Is there like a Monero room in session?
There's a cryptocurrency room which tends to focus most of its discussion around privacy coins, being the session application. I don't know if there's a particular Monero room. There's a thing called Session Communities online, and that shows like a fairly large group of a fairly large amount of the groups. Let me see if there's anything here. Yeah, I'll link this.
Yeah, we'll have to start it, man. I mean, we'll start the Monerotopia one for sure. Monero one at the same time. But...
yeah, I'll link this to you later.
Yeah, no, I would. We got to do that. We got to support our own, And you guys are as close to a Monero based technology that we can get, right? So like let's pivot to that, talking about Oxen and like the architecture of Oxen itself. It is a fork of the Monero protocol, correct?
Yeah. So Oxen was forked from Monero in 2018. So it wasn't a hard fork, so we didn't preserve any of the blockchain history from Monero. It's more of a code fork. Where we took Monero's code and iterated on top of that. So yeah, we have upstreamed a few of our things back to Monero. I know, for example, adding in IPv6 support was something that we upstreamed back to Monero. But I think like at this point, the code bases have significantly deviated from each other. And I don't think we've merged Monero back since probably 2020, like 2020 or something like that.
And so explain more like the relationship between, the nodes and like the blockchain Oxen itself, like how those things are working in tandem.
Yeah, so the cryptocurrency side of things basically operates as a Monero blockchain where all the transactions are private. You have ring signatures, stealth addresses, all of the stuff that Monero has. And they basically... but that part of things basically establishes this currency layer, and people have Oxen balances. So then they can use that Oxen to be able to stake service nodes. So if you have up to 15,000, well, it's 15,000 Oxen exactly, you can use that amount to start a service node. And a service node's function basically is to route messages for session, do Lokinet packet routing, but also it operates inside of the network as a proof of stake node as well. So in 2021, I think we forked away from proof of work, and we're an entirely proof of stake system now. So yeah, basically the service nodes will also push the chain forward. They create new blocks, they order transactions, they do everything that's required to operate a normal blockchain, a normal Monero blockchain, but they also do these additional services, which is to route messages to session, route data for Lokinet as well. So I think maybe the closest thing you can think about Oxen as is kind of like an illegitimate love child between, say, like Dash and Monero. So it has this kind of masternode network, but then it also has the privacy of Monero as well. So yeah, it's kind of combining those two things.
How many nodes are there?
So service nodes is about 1,800 service nodes. So we have about 45% of the supply, or I think it's 40% of the supply currently staked and operating a service node. And then there's also full nodes out there as well, which aren't operating as service nodes, but there aren't as many of those.
Oh, wow. So 45% of the supply is essentially locked up in these nodes. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So that obviously, I guess, affects kind of the volatility of Oxen, right? Or it makes it more scarce, right? I guess, arguably.
Yeah, I think there is definitely a liquidity effect that it has, just because there isn't as much Oxen out there floating on exchanges and stuff. But there's definitely churn that happens with the service node network as well. I think probably month on month, we probably have 2 or 3% of the service node network will drop out, and then 2 or 3% will join. So, there's definitely people who are unlocking the service node, selling that Oxen. Then there's people coming in who are staking new Oxen. So it does create a bit of liquidity when that happens. But yeah, definitely be lower liquidity than something where the entire supply kind of floats around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't we should have you on the proof of stake versus proof of work panel that we're going to do, right? I mean, I know you're going to be like another talk, but if we could fit you on there, maybe, maybe we'll
super happy. I mean, I think we're the only crypto node proof of stake coin that I know. I think there may be another one called
Zano. Zano is going to be
okay.
as well as Zarcanium or whatever. I think they're already proof of stake, right? Or
they're crypto node or
yeah. So that's being worked on. He's Andre Zal. I can't pronounce Zal. He's he claims to be the original, essentially, developer for the first implementation of CryptoNote.
Was that called Cutcoin at some point? I feel like there was something called Cutcoin that was maybe just before us or something.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
No, I don't know Cutcoin. Yeah, he'll be there, so that's cool. You guys will be maybe we'll get you both on that panel. That's it. So why did you guys move to proof of stake? What was the technical reason for that?
Well, I think there was several reasons. One of the larger reasons though was that we had a lot of mining centralization going on. So we had very large pools that were essentially had most of the hash power in a single pool, which I know is something that Monero has struggled with, having pools that were over 50% of the hash rate, or pools that for a consistent period of time are at 40 or 35% of the hash rate, where you can essentially just have two pools come together and 51% attack the chain. So we were very not comfortable with that system where you had collusion of a few pools would be able to bring down the entire network essentially. We also economically, I think there was a lot of miners who were not mining because they were ideologically aligned with the vision. They were kind of mining because the coin was the most profitable coin at the time. So you would see a lot of these people who would do this kind of multi-coin mining, where essentially they would switch between, say, all of the crypto note coins, so like Monero, Haven, Oxen, and essentially like when the profitability switched, all of their hash power would switch as well. And that was creating these like periods where we'd have lots of blocks and then a few blocks, like because the difficulty would have to adjust between the hash rate turning up and down. And for smaller coins, that's really hard because you can't really predict like when your block times are going to come. There can be really long periods without blocks. Then also, like, I will like briefly mention like environmental sustainability was a thought. It wasn't our main reason, but obviously running the network on proof of stake, you don't need as much electricity. That's the basic premise of it, as mining does. Now there's controversy about where different types of power comes from for mining, like whether it's from industrial sources or it's renewable electricity. But either way, you need less electricity to run a proof of stake network than you do a proof of work one. So that was a pretty obvious choice for us. So yeah, I mean, there was a bunch of reasons, but I think those are the primary ones.
So the primary one was kind of like maintaining your decentralization, especially because you guys were a smaller project, right? I don't think Monero faces the issue as much. Like you said, right, there's been those concerns of pools getting too large and whatnot, but yeah.
Well, I think I think Monero does face some of the same issues,
Okay.
and I would say, like, especially from the mining pool perspective, I know that
P2 pool, right, is a pretty good solution. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I know that like I think it was 6 months ago, or maybe it was 12 months ago, Monero did have a mining pool that was over 50% of the hash rate for a brief period of time. It was like I think it was a week or something, not long. But that, like, having a mining pool that's over 50% of the hash rate essentially means that you are completely captured by a single mining pool operator deciding that they, if they want to hard fork the network, they can, because they're providing these templates to their to the people who are mining from their pool. Now, peer-to-peer pool, yeah, that does solve some of that issues, but I don't think, like, the adoption doesn't seem to be that large. I think they're maybe the 4th or 5th largest pool right now.
Slowly growing.
Yeah, they're growing 100%. But yeah, also, like, not even from the centralization perspective, but also, like, I think there's a sense that there may be some regulatory capture as well in the mining sector. I know the Bitcoin people are really facing a lot of this headwind right now with trying to explain that mining isn't as bad for the environment as people say it is. But there's this strong view, and I think that the climate change kind of activism is only going to get stronger over the next like 10, 20 years. I don't see that trend reversing. And I think a very easy target for them to come after is miners, because they see it as miners are burning electricity without, it's not providing anything to the network. I know that, like, informed people see it completely differently from that, but you're facing an uninformed kind of consumer base of millions and millions of people, and working against that regulatory capture, I feel like it's going to be hard. I mean, Monero's already got problems there, obviously, because it's got privacy coin, right? Like,
yeah, so. I mean, we have random X. I totally agree with you that I often list that as a primary difference between Monero and Bitcoin, right? I do see that as an attack vector for governments and regulatory bodies, right? That want to knock on the doors of these large mining corporations and whatever, implement the regulations they want to implement, basically force them to do certain things, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's going to be harder with Monero, I think, because of the random X nature, right? So it's mostly only CPU mined, so it's not. You don't really have. What are they going to do? They're just going to regulate the usage of CPUs at that point. You know what I'm saying? At that point, they're essentially regulating how people use CPUs in their homes.
Yeah, I think that could definitely I think the reality of Monero mining, I haven't looked into it in quite a while, but I think there's this kind of utopian vision that, Monero mining would be everyone just turning on their CPUs and we'll have this kind of, party where it's all of the users that are mining. But I think you still have a high amount of centralization around mining farms, in particular areas where electricity is extremely cheap and hardware can be got extremely cheap as well. So that would be kind of closer to the sources, closer to kind of cheaper electricity sources and cheaper hardware sources. So I think you probably still see some centralization around the Asia area, which tends to be the area where regulations are more stronger against privacy. So what you may see is some of those miners turning off their hash power and the hash power for the network being reduced, which makes it potentially easier to attack in the future. But I think what we're more likely to see if there is a real move against privacy coins is an abandonment from institutional actors. So those exchanges that do still serve Monero transactions, kind of moving away from Monero transactions. I think that's probably the more likely effect rather than it destroying the mining network completely, because, there's always people that will be willing to risk, evading the law to turn on some miners and earn some profit. And that's only going to become more attractive as there's less miners on the network. But finding institutional bodies that are willing to serve the Monero ecosystem and take that risk, I think is going to be much harder than, continuing to support the mining network.
Mm-hmm. You mean like exchanges and things like that?
Exchanges, yeah. And I think I think there's almost like this vision in the Monero and privacy community that, if large exchanges were to come out and ban Monero or other privacy coins, that there would kind of be this Streisand effect where you would see more people adopt it. But I think this is actually not true. I think we're too early in the cycle for people to be that hard on things. And if there was to be kind of a consumer ban where the US said you can't hold Monero, it's illegal, I think there would be a massive decrease in interest in
I would be like the only schmuck trying to grab more Monero at that point is what you're saying.
Well, I don't know who would be willing. I don't think there would be that many people willing to risk.
I tell you right now, if they ban it, and I would certainly try to grab a hell of a lot more.
Well, we know the US government is coming direct to your house then.
I know. Fortunately, I have a really bad habit of not writing down my private keys and losing my keys. Fucking suck at that part. Yeah, I don't know. I think the Streisand effect is a real thing. I mean, obviously, I get what you're saying. If it's going to be very difficult for people to obtain, but it's already kind of difficult, right? It's already, and people go out of their way to get it because they really need it, right? For purposes some people are just speculating, but there's a lot of people that are getting it because whatever, they want to go shopping on the dark market, or they need to send a private transaction. So I don't know.
I think that's true. They're definitely Monero has a strong community of people who are actually using Monero, which is really bullish for its continued existence. But I'm more talking about price now. In terms of what is the speculative multiple in the price, which is people speculating on future growth of Monero. And I think I can't I've not sat down and valued it, but I would assume the speculative value over what people are actually using Monero for is probably 10 times what Monero is actually worth, and as a kind of transactional currency. But that is still bullish if you're just a Monero user and what you're doing is basically converting some stable currency into Monero, using it, and then doing the same thing over and over again. You'll still always have access to that privacy. It just may not, the investment aspect of Monero, I think it is harder to sell when regulators are coming after it harder and harder. And I really realize as I'm talking about this, I'm also talking about Oxen as well, because we're a privacy
yeah.
Monero-based coin. But
wish for or not.
yeah, I think it's important to be like realistic about like where
I
things are
get
going.
you. I get I get you. So like being ultimately bullish all the time, like, well, this is all, everything's good for Monero, right? Like that's kind of like the meme in Bitcoin, but I don't know. You don't really have me convinced because like the thing is like it would be, if anything, it'd be a lot less volatile, right? That's why I think we see Monero acts relatively stable, right? Anecdotally, if you kind of compare it to others, right? It seems like it's not. I mean, obviously, people can look at the volatility itself, but it seems to act like more of a stable, slow-moving, priced coin, right? And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it isn't easy to buy, but it also isn't easy to dump and sell, right? There's not too many on and off fiat ramps, so it kind of goes both ways, right? It won't just maybe make it easier to purchase, but it makes it more difficult to then like dump your coins, right? So I think it would have kind of a effect on both ends. And then obviously we would have decentralized exchanges, right? And then that, that not just Monero, but Oxen and other privates, like all that stuff. I mean, it already exists and it's only getting more usable. But you think that would just scare people out of interacting with these cryptos, even if there's ways for them to do it essentially without being stopped through decentralized exchanges?
No, I think the decentralized exchange experience is going to get so good that people aren't going to be scared off using decentralized exchanges, especially from crypto to crypto. I think that in 5 years that'll be completely solved. There won't really be that many exchanges who are dealing solely with crypto to crypto exchange. Exchanges will mostly be dealing with fiat on ramping, which probably still needs to exist mostly at the exchange layer, just because like the traditional monetary system requires like KYC and all of that stuff. I'm more concerned about like, for example, if there was a ban on holding like Monero, like even though this is like extremely hard to enforce, like at a governmental level, I think that they could do it. Like they could say something like, you can't file your taxes or something like around, holdings of Monero. And that would basically, institutionally, that would really like destroy any institutional investment in Monero, I think, because if you can't like file it and you're an illegal holder, and there would still be like an underground of people that are still using Monero, I think it would just make it, like to your average like mom and pop person who like wants more privacy in their life and wants to have their digital life, free from surveillance. Are they going to risk like violating the law by holding Monero at a point in time? Like, even if they can get it easily on a decentralized exchange and you've solved this like centralized aspect, is there going to be are these like average people going to risk it to be able to get more privacy?
Monero people aren't average people, my friend. We're not average. We're not average people.
Yeah.
I think Monero's done a pretty good job already at kind of filtering out the weak, so it would take a hit in terms of users a little bit, in terms of speculators, but the core users, I think, would just become more motivated about the cause globally. Like there would be the initial, the initial setback, right? Like maybe a momentary retreat. But I think then at that point, the mission just becomes more important than ever,
Yeah, I
just
definitely
a wild Liberty Monero guy, but I don't think I'm the only one,
No. Like I 100% agree with you. There's going to be a core of Monero like users who are going to stay on no matter what. Like, and it's probably all of the people that are interested in Monero right now and who are Monero users would probably stick as Monero users. It just becomes much harder to onboard new people into the space who aren't willing to take that risk, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you could definitely make arguments. Like, for example, like drugs have been illegal for a very long time. People still use them. People still take the risk to buy drugs illegally, right? So it's hard to say that it would completely stop kind of Monero usage, and that's not what I'm kind of arguing. I'm just arguing that the speculative multiplier is probably likely to leave the Monero ecosystem.
Okay. And so do you, is this something that you think do you put some like legitimate odds on this happening? And would it be, do you see it as being like they're going after Monero, or they're going after all of crypto, or they're going after all quote unquote privacy coins, excluding Dash, or like what are they doing? You know, like what
My view is that the like regulators actually kind of like the transparency of Bitcoin, and
yes, I agree there.
I think they're going to be okay with allowing Bitcoin to continue to exist, at least at a privacy level. Like they may have qualms about Bitcoin mining, for example, which they see as environmentally unfriendly. There may be some regulations in that aspect, but I think. I think Monero, it's hard to say whether they're going to go after it soon. Like, I don't know whether they will. And I'm making the bear case right now as well. Like, I'm not sure.
You make me excited, man. You just like you make me want to like run outside with the Monero flag. Like,
yeah, I'm not in favor of any of this regulation. I just see it as something that is maybe coming down the pipeline. As being like, I've been in the privacy ecosystem since 2018. We've been running a privacy project since 2018. Like, we're obviously very close with people in the Monero community and stuff. And like, I just see, I haven't felt like this kind of more impending doom that I have about regulatory oversight than I have recently, especially with the FTX stuff. I feel like they are really now like have this kind of mandate to go after cryptocurrencies hard, especially exchanges, but like cryptocurrency in general as well. So that's my alarm.
Yeah, no, I think, you look at governments around like in Europe, right, on a high level, they're talking about how to handle privacy coins, right, and basically want to KYC AML all wallet providers, right, even maybe like, whatever, obviously hosted wallet, like they're like maybe potentially trying to move in that direction, right. Yeah, the walls are definitely closing in on a global scale, right? And you have these large regulatory bodies that essentially create the regulation that then the entire world ends up adopting. But I ran for Congress here in the U.S. in 2020, and like I read the Constitution. I went to law. I'm an attorney. I passed the bar. Like I'm not. How do they ban Monero but don't ban Bitcoin? Like what is then like the legal argument? How are they doing that? I just don't see how you could like ban code. You could ban Monero. You could ban free speech money, right? If you're banning Monero, what exactly are you banning, and how are you not like banning Bitcoin at that point? What I struggle with.
I don't know if you're like, look, I'm not a constitutional expert and I'm not a lawyer in the US. But I don't know if you ban Monero, but you probably just put some very like onerous, like kind of money laundering regulations around it, like that you need to KYC essentially the parties that you're interacting with when you transact with Monero, or you need to provide some element of traceability when you use Monero, for example, like exposing your view keys for every transaction you perform. Or like they have this travel rule. The CFTC has this travel rule, right? Like where you need to identify, and I think this is only for exchanges right now, but where you need to identify the parties that you're interacting with or that you're sending Monero to or receiving Monero from.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Exchanges can comply with that because they KYC the people that they interact with usually. But they may apply that to individual transactions, for example. They're getting harder on even cash at this point in some of the non kind of US countries, like moving more to credit cards and traceable forms of transactions, and lowering the barrier for how much cash you're allowed to use in personal transactions. So I know, like, I think you can't transact business transactions more than $10,000 in Australia. I think that's a rule that they passed recently or something. So I think they're not going to necessarily come after Monero specifically, but they're going to regulate in such a way where it'd be very hard to operate with the qualities of Monero without needing to expose some element of your transaction or something like that. I think that could be a possibility for how they would regulate these things without going after specific things, and still within the legal framework. I mean, they could declare if Monero is banned, you cannot hold Monero. I don't know if it sounds like that would be unconstitutional, though. Like, I don't know if you'd be able to say
on
that.
a bunch of different levels, I would think. But and then we'd see what happens, right? Like, doesn't mean anything just because it's clearly unconstitutional, right? We have to see how that all plays out.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I would weigh heavily on the side of it succeeding, even just the way politics works in the U.S. I mean, I think ultimately you would have those that would come to its aid because they would want to protect encryption, the larger tech sector of like encryption tech and Bitcoin, and they would see it as an attack there. But who knows? We shall see. We shall see. I didn't realize. I didn't realize it was going to be such a dark and gloomy conversation, Kee. I didn't know.
Yeah. I really shouldn't have run the bear case. Yeah.
No, but so where do you? So I mean, you're basically building, or you built, a fork of Monero, and it does all these things. So what kind of what keeps you going? I mean, if they're in the back of your mind, there's a decent chance that essentially the global powers that be clamp down on the technology that you're creating. What keeps you going?
Well, I think particularly for the last couple of years, we've been focused more on the communication side of things. So Sessions obviously providing private communications, and I think there is a bit more of an understanding from regulators that the private communications are needed. I mean, there's still a bunch of laws that are coming around which are very anti-encryption, especially in Australia, which we've had to kind of put up our own protections against, like being open source and not having access, the same level of access to the network that centralized providers would have if they were running their services in Australia, kind of protect us from those laws. But I think, I've just kind of presented a bear case. I think I've woken up this morning in a bearish mood. The bullish kind of narrative for privacy coins is that there's a growing kind of understanding in the population that there is a need for privacy. And this is coming through, I think you see it really aggressively coming through with the more data leaks that are coming out. So data leaks from Facebook, or for example, in Australia, we just had like Medibank leak all of their customer data. And we've had a number of large companies leak customer data as well. And I think users are starting to understand that you cannot trust data which is siloed with centralized companies, because it will be hacked and exposed at some point. So I think there's a growing desire from the consumer for privacy. And if the consumer pushes for privacy at the financial layer as well, then it will be impossible for governments to pass regulation which limits privacy at the financial layer. So I think it's really, kind of me selling the bear case, I hope is motivation for people to get out there and talk more about privacy at the financial layer, so that they can prevent these legislation, or these laws from being passed. We don't want to get to that point. No one wants to get to that point. So advocating at this stage for privacy coins is super important, so that we don't get to the point where regulators are like, well, we're just going to fucking ban them all, or pass super onerous regulations.
Yeah, we have to normalize it, right? We have to make it like taboo for them to ban it. Be like, what? Like,
exactly.
Everyone needs to be up in arms at that point.
Yeah.
So I don't want to. I know we stuck on this banning thing for a while, but so do you see a scenario? Would there be a scenario where Oxen, let's say there was some kind of universal bans, or America bans privacy coins and whatever, Oxen gets thrown in there with Monero? Would Oxen then pivot and no longer be a privacy coin, but Session would still run on top of it? I mean, is that because you kind of said well, we're more focused on the messaging part, right? So I'm just curious how you're thinking about those things.
Yeah, I mean, technically it would be possible. I think we could run Session is this network of nodes, right? So it can be, it's an incentivized network of nodes. It doesn't necessarily need to be incentivized by a privacy coin. But I think having privacy at all the layers is an attractive quality that we're presenting right now, because we have privacy at the currency layer, we have privacy at the communications layer. And all of the layers above that, you can build applications on top of Session and Lokinet and stuff. So I think that's a really good selling point for us that I would like to preserve. But I don't think it's necessarily required. Like you can imagine a coin, or you can imagine a network like Tor is built without a coin at all, and still provides privacy to its users, right? So there's not necessarily a hard requirement to have a privacy coin for Session and Lokinet to continue to function, but it does provide some advantages, which we're
I mean that's what gives the incentive here, right? For people to run the nodes, right?
Yeah, exactly. So people were rewarded in Oxen for running nodes and stake Oxen to run nodes. So yeah.
Yeah. So what would you say, how would you describe Oxen's kind of value proposition then, right? Like in Monero, it's digital, right? It's trying to be untraceable digital cash. So Oxen is really, does it have, how would you describe its kind of mission? It's trying to be the fuel, the gas that runs privacy apps or something?
Yeah, it's similar to that. So essentially, like the value proposition, or why someone would potentially want to buy Oxen, is because they believe in Session and Lokinet, the products that we're building on top of the Oxen service node network. And the way that we're hoping to feed value back into the network is to provide premium features on Session and Lokinet. And then use that premium feature that the user is paying for. Say they pay $3 a month for a Session Pro, which offers some advanced features in Session. Then that $3 a month is used to buy and burn Oxen, thereby reducing the supply over time. So our remit is like much less a private digital cash and more like an ecosystem of privacy preserving applications, which you support by buying Oxen, and then also get that feedback in the network as well through the applications that we're pushing, buying and burning Oxen through their usage.
Are there other use cases or apps beyond messaging apps and essentially a Tor-like system that are in the works? Like, what do you guys see as being like the next kind of big thing that could be built on top of Oxen?
I think we're really focusing on Session right now. But Lokinet is essentially like network layer privacy for any application that you want to build. And there's a whole like darknet inside of Lokinet, which exists in the .loki address space. So there's all of these .loki domains which people operating and can have anything hosted there as well. So there's a lot of space to explore applications on top of Lokinet, I would say. But yeah, I think like primarily our focus over the last like year or two or year and a half has been Session.
How about like, a decentralized exchange or a marketplace, like kind of like an open bazaar, or what we saw that was built on Particle. Are there, I'm sure you've thought about these things. Like, what is your take on that with regards to Oxen?
Yeah, like someone could build a marketplace definitely on top of Lokinet. That would be a more centralized affair, I suppose, because Lokinet provides you network level anonymity, or it provides anonymity for the user and the server operator, but there still would be a server operator there, which would be hosting the marketplace, for example. If you want to build a kind of more decentralized marketplace, then you probably want the users to be hosting some portion of it, or the service nodes to be hosting some portion of it. We have thought about that before, but haven't really explored it because I think like Open Bazaar I think they've shut down now. I don't know if anyone's really carrying the flag right now for decentralized marketplaces. Is the Particle thing still going, or?
Yeah, it's going. I don't know how much it's used. They'll be down at Monerotopia.
Awesome.
Monerotopia. Yeah, I think I recently heard that the Open Bazaar guy was going to try to start working on it again. I think now he thinks now's the time. Like it was kind of ahead of its time, I guess. And then I forget the name. There's an interesting one that's being worked on that's Monero based. It's the guy in the chat. No, well, I'm sure some people in the chat might know what I'm talking about. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of the holy grail, right? Nobody's really hit it yet, and it seems like, you know, Oxen, given the master nodes, or what do you call them? You call them
service nodes.
Service nodes. That it's all the architectures there to somewhat easily deploy a decentralized marketplace.
I think one of the things that the OpenBazaar people, because I use OpenBazaar and I bought a bunch of things on there as well.
Okay.
Like earrings and stuff for my mum. Nothing crazy. But I think one of the things that they were struggling with was discoverability of items. So they had these two search providers, I think, that you would launch with, but then you could add other search providers to search the kind of, I guess, DHT for listings. But I think they ran into a lot of issues. Like, for example, if you download the application, there's a whole bunch of drug listings in the application when you download it. Is that the responsibility of the providers of the open source software? I think they are really running into that issue like pretty hard, and they didn't want to just provide complete discoverability of the entire network when the client was opened so that people wouldn't get stuff like that. But then I think that also reduced the viability of the network, because I feel like most people wanted to use it for illicit reasons. So I think you run into probably a pretty, and like, I probably fall more on the kind of Silk Road philosophy that like marketplaces should just be fairly open and we shouldn't really regulate what is displayed in marketplaces. But I think like the reality of running a company runs up into, or even distributing open source software, like hits into that pretty hard. So it's like a big balancing act, I think, that you would have to make.
Do you think it's
the provider of that marketplace.
possible to build something that kind of, you know, reaches that attains that goal of being usable and searchable and discoverable, or have those abilities in a marketplace while still being decentralized?
Oh, 100%. Like technically it's like very possible. I think you just need someone who's willing to take the risk to run it or distribute the open source software to provide that marketplace without too much filtering. Because I think you want to hit this sweet point between like providing what the user expects when they open the application, which for decentralized marketplaces is probably more on the illicit side of things, and the person who's willing to distribute that open source software and potentially face the blowback that they may get for distributing something like that. So yeah, definitely technically possible, and probably wouldn't be that hard either as well. Like yeah, I mean, this is coming from like this. I'm the CTO at Oxen, so I'm not necessarily the best person to talk about, you know, legal and all of that stuff. But yeah, technically, definitely possible.
What is Loki like compared to NIM? Lokinet compared to something like NIM? NIM's going to be at Monerotopia as well. Just trying to kind of understand, you know, NIM versus Lokinet versus Tor. You just kind of put those three side by side.
Yeah, so NIM is more of what we would call a mixnet. So they actually have techniques which will, we often talk about this threat kind of in the anonymous networking world, which is called a global passive adversary. So this is kind of a threat where the person is monitoring every single internet connection, which can happen. They're at the ISP level. They can see all of your traffic, both on the entry side and the exit side as well. And this is like somewhat a realistic threat these days, because, you know, we have organizations like the NSA who have kind of this global purview to monitor the entire internet. And mixnets like NIM take this like trade-off where they delay the sending and receipt, like the sending of packets as they transmit through the network. And that provides some better guarantees against these kind of global passive adversaries at the expense of kind of having lower or having higher latency in the network, and also lower throughput. the difference between Tor and Lokinet then is that they don't really try to protect against this global passive adversary. They try to protect against a kind of weaker level attacker, an attacker who can only see some portion of the network instead of the entire kind of global portion of the network. But on the other side of the trade-off, they get way better latency and way better throughput. So yeah, it's really like a trade-off that is being made. NIM's making their model is higher security, but with lower throughput and higher latency, and Tor and Lokinet are lower latency and higher throughput, but their security model is lower.
Right. So basically, like with like Lokinet, you could basically fully use the internet the way you natively would, and you're getting this privacy protection. You're using the internet anonymously, but not in a way that's as secure as something like NIM. You're saying for certain types of attacks.
Yeah, and you're probably never, like, I won't say this because I haven't talked to the NIM guys in a while, but you're probably never going to be able to do like simultaneous voice and video calls through NIM. You'll probably never be able to like download torrents and like, you know, larger like file sizes through NIM. They're focusing much more at like a transactional layer, like sending a transaction through NIM is totally possible. Potentially sending messages or low bandwidth communications is possible through NIM. And yeah, so they're kind of focusing on a different market.
I love that you likely will be talking with them in person at Monerotopia, at least some representative from their team. That's awesome.
Yeah. We run into them every now and again because they're like in a very close space to us. Like, so I think the last time I talked to them was like 6 months ago or something. So yeah, it happens every so often.
One last question about Oxen, because I don't know if we've ever covered this. So what is like the coin supply? Is it the same as Monero's? Is it, and it's also, you know, go ahead.
Early on, the emissions was exactly this, like the emissions schedule was exactly the same as Monero's, but the emission for Monero is like very heavy on the early side of things. So it like provides a lot of coins in the first say year of production of Monero. There was a lot of coins emitted and then kind of lowers over time. It hits a tail emission. We have changed the token economics, so we have already hit the tail emission, and it's just 16.5 Oxen per block, which will be generated for the rest of existence.
Okay.
And
why 16.5? Why not like in Monero it's whatever 0.6 tail emission? Why such a large? Or why that number?
Well, there's less supply, or this. This is it's hard to explain because we've done a bunch of different things in our tokenomics here. But the 16.5 Oxen is related to the service node reward. So it's what we believe is the right balancing point between the amount of service nodes we need to maintain decentralization on the network, and also provide enough reward for people to continue to run service nodes. So if it drops too low, what you'll see is service nodes deregistering from the network until you reach a balancing point. Because essentially like this 16.5 Oxen is given out at a per block level. So as service nodes deregister, they get more of this kind of 16.5 Oxen. And if more service nodes register, they're sharing less 16.5 Oxen essentially. So it's like a balancing point for the service node network to be as large as it is right now. But then you also, like, it becomes complicated when you also take price into account there, because service nodes will have overheads that are fixed in USD. Like, for example, they have to pay for VPSs and stuff. So that becomes a factor in how many service nodes are on the network as well.
How many Oxen approximately exist? Like, have been essentially?
I think it's like 63 million or something like that.
Okay.
Is the total supply?
Interesting. Okay. And so, how about like a potential criticism that, or whatever, not, it's some, yeah, I guess let's say a criticism that, Oxen is too centralized in terms of its development, right? Like, oh, we're gonna change the coin supply, we're gonna do this, like, which is great, right? You're able to pivot and perfect the protocol and the apps that are built on it for your purposes. But does it arguably make it something that may not stand the test of times in terms of trusting the blockchain that's underlying everything?
I think this, you can map this argument like fairly strongly like back onto like Ethereum and Bitcoin. Like Ethereum is taking a more kind of active approach in terms of its like supply management. So you like see that they changed their token economics recently with the merge, like reducing supply and having this burn mechanism. I think Oxen maps kind of more strongly onto the Ethereum side. And Monero probably maps more strongly onto the Bitcoin side, where token economics are fairly fixed from the point of origin. So I don't think it's necessarily a critique. I think it's just a different style of managing the token supply and being more flexible with that. But that obviously does have downsides as well in terms of, yeah, it's unarguably more like centralized to be changing like token supply more often, but it also gives you this flexibility that say like Bitcoin and Monero I think like don't have to a certain extent.
Right, and this is what differentiates these projects. Like once again, we're saying like you're like Oxen isn't trying to be digital cash, digital gold, right? It's not its core value prop. There was another. Oh yeah, so like how about like actually like updates that we see in Monero, like technological updates, like Monero is going to be adding Seraphis. Are these things that Oxen will likely adopt, or it depends on if it I guess makes it easier for your apps to run on, right?
Yeah, I think we probably will have another look at the privacy layer. Like Monero hasn't changed too much in the lot, like on the privacy layer side. We're still using ring signatures, still using self addresses. We've made some changes here and there to payment IDs and stuff like that. But there hasn't been a kind of major overhaul in Monero. I would say like they haven't switched to zero knowledge proofs, for example. But like we're looking at a bunch of different privacy technologies right now and deciding what we want to do with the future of the privacy base layer. Like a lot has changed since 2018. I think there's a lot more out there now, especially I think the zero knowledge space has really developed in the last like 2-3 years. So it would be interesting to see. I know Firo is talking about what's their privacy layer, Lelantis,
Yes,
that they were talking about, and they're moving to another one. And Zcash is talking about Halo, which has solved a lot of the issues with zero knowledge proofs. Removing the trusted setup and providing scalability to a large degree that wasn't there before. So I think it's like time. It's coming about time for us to have like a serious look at all of the solutions and decide like which one is the best for moving forward with base layer privacy. I think it was pretty clear in 2018 what the solution was for privacy, and it was Monero, just because it provided like this great balance between usability, like privacy by default as well, like having all the transactions on the chain be default privacy, whereas like Zcash had this like theoretical solution more that was only applying to like 1% of transactions. But with stuff like Halo and Lelantis, I think that gap is kind of closing. So I think more of the solutions become viable, and I wouldn't be surprised if Monero in the next like 5 to 10 years gets rid of ring signatures, for example, and moves to a more
for sure.
approach.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a big topic of conversation at Monerotopia. We're going to have a panel just on kind of the future of Monero tech, and I plan on making that a big topic of convo. Yeah, I like Luke. Are you familiar with Luke Parker? He'll be down there, and he has some thoughts on that. He's a Monero dev. He's building also Sarai. I don't know if you're familiar with Luke, but yeah, he'll be down there.
No, I'm not, but
yeah, no, it's something that's obviously openly discussed and the Monero community is excited about, but you're just trying to do it in the right way. So potentially, maybe we could see Oxen implement, kind of lead the way, right? So you guys, like we said, being more nimble, right? Not trying to be digital gold, less concerned potentially about breaking some things potentially along the way. Could we see you guys implement it like sooner than later? What's the thinking there?
Yeah, I definitely think it could if like we have more flexibility than Monero. We're not dealing with the same amount of users, at least at the base layer for transactional privacy. So like I think there is an opportunity for us to go a bit more aggressive on some of these more experimental technologies. So yeah, I think that's definitely possible. I think we're going to make it like, I think the next stage is like just doing a review of like what is in the space right now though. And trying to work out what the best technology might be to provide like the users at the base layer the most privacy.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I think we'll call it there. So then we have some time and we can jump into the chat. I'm sure people have questions. We got a pretty decent group in there. I think we did a good, we talked about everything a little bit, and I don't want to zoom in on anything too much. And, you're going to be down there giving your talk. I don't want you to give your talk here, essentially, and then give your talk again. Do you have any idea what your talk will be focused on?
Yeah, I think we're going to talk about kind of building a second layer on top of Monero and how that experience has been.
Okay.
Because forking Monero and dealing with the service node network and all of that has been a pretty unique experience. So I think that could be interesting to talk to the Monero kind of audience about.
Yeah. You got me excited. So like kind of talking about like a lightning network type thing on Monero.
I don't know if we will talk necessarily about payment channels and networks like that, but maybe more just about our experience like building this kind of second layer service node network on top of Monero and how that's been.
Okay. I
think that could be applicable to other people who are looking to build like directly on top of Monero or like just thinking about like how you may bootstrap another layer on top of Monero.
Yeah, without getting too far into the woods, is there potentially, or have you think potentially a way to do it where, a percentage of the coin rewards isn't going towards those nodes, but the nodes are somehow running on the network as a second layer? Is that feasible? Is that possible?
Yeah, I think it is possible. It's just much harder to bootstrap a network without like a network emission being directed towards them, because then you need to rely entirely on fees from the users, and getting that off the ground in the first place is trickier because you don't have as long to experiment, with users being provided rewards.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, and we'll leave it at that so we don't ruin your presentation. Kee, man, this is awesome. Anything you want to put out there before we jump into the chat, like resources, if you just kind of throw all that stuff out there?
Yeah, if you want to have a try of Session, go to getsession.org. We're on Twitter. We also have our own groups inside of Session as well. So if you want to talk to me, my Session ID is pretty public on Twitter, but I'll also go by if you put in the name Kee Jeff into a Session, you'll also be able to reach me. I would say let's try and push towards the bull case for Monero and Oxen. I know I talked a lot on this show about like potentially the bear case. What could
It's
happen
a roller coaster, right? First you beat us down and then you pick us back up. We do it all the time on the show.
Yeah, so I think it's really important that we all push towards making regulators especially and us as users like stronger on the privacy side of things, so we don't have to deal with that bear case which I explained earlier. So yeah, let's all push this community forward, and I think that's a big part of what Monerotopia and Monerocon and stuff is going to do, is push that case forward more aggressively, so that we don't end up in the space where Monero and other privacy coins are just like regulated.
Unite to fight. Yeah, man. I love what you guys are doing. With Monerotopia, like you said, we wanted to bring the privacy ecosystem together, but we wanted to balance that against not, giving a stage to pump and dump shit coins. And so it was a little, it has been a little bit of a struggle, but like Oxen, it's a very easy sell, right? And at least for me personally, like I've seen you guys grow over time. You're not a fly by night. You guys have been putting in the hard work, building unique tech. I mean, look at Session. Nobody can say anything there, right? Like the amount of actual real world use you're getting for this technology. It's a beautiful thing. And the way you talk about the tech, you don't talk about it in terms of, what Oxen's going to be worth. You talk about it in terms of the technology and the usability. So kudos to you, man. And I know Monero and Oxen will continue to work together in this ecosystem. So appreciate all the work you've been doing, man.
Awesome. Thanks, Doug.
All right. So let's jump into the spaces. So if you want to just move over there. All right. I'm over here. Let me add Key. All right. And now anybody that wants to jump up, ask Key some questions about Session or Loki or Oxen. Yep, I got you. Awesome. Anybody, come on. There's got to be a question. We have a pretty group here. We talked about a lot of stuff. Just jump on up, guys. Any questions regarding Session or Loki or Oxen?
Oh, my Duma case from Monero. I want to hear your opinions.
Bloom case, they're going to regulate. They're going to ban Monero. They're going to knock on our demand. Nobody's. I don't know. We'd be doing a glitch thing here. People aren't able to request. I've had that before. Sunita, you want to see if you can request? I'm just curious. Oh, here we go. We got somebody. All right. Yeah, that happened to us last week. Nobody was able to request.
Damn.
I got Julian requesting. Julian, what's going on?
Hi everyone. Thanks a lot for the interesting conversation. I personally try to migrate people to Session. I think it's a great thing, but some people it's a bit hard to convince people to give up on some of the for example the tons of stickers that are so well known from Telegram and things like that. So, but generally, I'm a big fan of something that is really encrypted and going end to end, and also having a decentralized incentive mechanism that's not reliant on central parties. I think it's a great thing. And I must say in the conversation, one thing that I kind of share your concern that if the politics actually goes for a ban of holding Monero, I think this is going to be a tough time. I know some people say it's going to be great and we are all still going to continue it, but to continue building it. But I think most people are going to be afraid, and I don't know. I just hope it will not happen. That's just it.
Yeah.
Wow, a lot of doom and gloomers here. Go ahead, Key.
No, I think as I was saying at the end, I think it's for us. It's up to us to make sure that we don't get to that point. And I think if we push privacy forward enough, we won't get to that point, hopefully. And I think it's starting to become more clear now to people how important privacy is. And we've seen that especially with more and more adoption of Session. So I hope the same thing happens to Monero. And if Monero is adopted to or Monero and Oxen are adopted to a certain extent, it'll become impossible for new regulation to be passed. So we just need to get more users basically and get to a critical mass where it's really hard for them to pass new regulations.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, that's, I kind of had a little back and forth with Seth for privacy. Seth, I'm sure you're familiar with Seth. He's quite popular.
Yeah.
And he recently kind of, not that he's, he's a Monero user, Monero lover, enthusiast, but he's kind of moved his efforts towards pushing the growth of Bitcoin privacy tech versus pushing Monero. And I think, obviously absolutely nothing wrong with that, but I do think there's this need to push people into things like Monero now. So we could have that, large enough network effect where if something were to come down on us, we would have the momentum to essentially fight against it.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Danish, what's going on, man?
Hello. Thanks for having me up. Long-time Monero user and fan, and long-time Oxen user. And I was wondering a couple of things. First of all, if Oxen has considered maybe trying to see if either the Lokinet node or the relay nodes can run on something like Flux to like build a decentralized net on a decentralized net, and it requires like a Docker instance. But if the Loki team has thought about that, that's my first question.
I'm assuming Flux is providing like some sort of decentralized hosting or storage. I've not heard of that network before.
Yes, Flux is basically a decentralized VPS service.
Okay.
You can host whatever nodes and stuff on there. And yeah, it works great for something like pre-search, decentralized search engine, and those nodes, and they're pretty lightweight. Basically cost like half of what it does to host otherwhere or other places. So was considering if you might want to look into it, because it's for me it's like inception wise, making sure that we have decentralized nodes running stable on places where they cannot be taken down. And since I don't even know where my pre-search nodes are located when I host them there, it's, I still control them, I still do all that, but it's hosted censorship resistant. So
yeah, I think it's actually a super good idea, because Lokinet can provide this network where both the server and the user are anonymous, and they can connect with each other through this onion routing network. But it doesn't say anything necessarily about the hosting of that server. And if the hosting of that server is centralized, that's still a point of failure that can exist. One of the things that we did look at kind of in the last few years was hosting stuff on Arweave, which is kind of decentralized storage network similar to IPFS. And that also provides decentralized hosting. So there are actually some Arweave sites that are up on Lokinet right now that are decentralized in their hosting and private in their access via server, and the user is private as well. But Flux sounds super interesting as well. And I don't think it would be hard to integrate into Lokinet as well, in terms of if you can host something with an IP address or internet connectivity, then you should be able to host it via Lokinet as well. So it sounds like an interesting integration. I'll write down a note to check it out later.
Awesome. I would love to see something like that happen. Their website is run on flux.io, if I remember right.
Awesome.
But it's it could be cool for me, at least. I think that this kind of decentralized inception is where we need to go, because we need privacy. We need to be able to, good or bad, be able to have our things out there. I've been trying to explain that for many people, and I still don't understand how it can be so hard for people to understand that privacy is necessary. But my second question, I'm sorry, how far are the session team with payment through session? Because the Telegram team are with Tuman has the last year now exploded. So it would be really nice to see a private version of payments with a messenger.
Yeah, we're basically building this thing called Wallet 3, which is kind of a streamlined version of this piece of code inside of Monero, which is called Wallet 2, which is very complex inside of Monero, and makes integration into Monero wallet integration into applications quite a bit more difficult. And since we're inheriting that code, it makes it a little bit difficult for us to integrate wallets into existing applications. But with Wallet 3, we're trying to develop a more streamlined wallet interface that we can integrate into other applications. So I think that work is going to really power the integration of the Oxen wallet into Session. It's definitely something we want to do, and it's actually on the roadmap for this year as well. So I think you'll be seeing it the later stage of this year, hopefully we'll be able to integrate the Oxen wallet into Session.
Very cool, man.
Awesome,
Very cool.
Thanks, thanks for having me up. That was all I had to ask for today, and keep up the amazing work, both of you.
Yeah,
Thank
man.
you.
Fantastic questions. Key, any chance like Monero would be added to this as well as a way to transact Monero?
I think it would require a Wallet 3. I don't know if it has a way to interact with Monero. I don't know if it is something that we could upstream. I know that the Monero team has been picking away at Wallet 2 and trying to refactor some of that code. Yeah, it would be interesting to be able to upstream some of that, and also, to be able to support Monero inside of the Session experience. I don't know. I haven't really thought about it that much, actually.
Yeah, that would be epic. Meow. Oh, Julian, go ahead. Or let's get Meow. I think Meow didn't talk yet, and then Julian will go back to you. Meow, what's going on?
Hey guys, I heard when you were talking about the, I think the term you used was like global, like persistent global threat. Can you remind me what that term you used was?
Yeah, global passive adversary.
Oh, okay, global passive adversary. So I was kind of wondering if, because the example that you used was like ISPs that are kind of like privacy defeating, and I was wondering if you think there's other kind of large major vectors that are kind of similar in like the scale of threat. Like, I don't know if just thinking out loud, if like compromised hardware is something that is like a real threat, or just wondering if you have somewhere to add on that.
Yeah, I think global passive adversaries are most often not just a singular IP, but if you go or a singular ISP, but if you go one level up from an ISP, you have these things called autonomous systems, which kind of provide smaller ISPs with access to the internet. And then you'll also have like these levels of exchanges as well. So you have like regional exchanges, then you have like kind of international exchanges, which usually will happen through like undersea cables under the water. And I think it's already been shown in some government papers that the NSA and the security agencies will actually tap the internet at the undersea cable level, or at least where the undersea cable first meets an exchange on the mainland. So they'll, like, the NSA will actually have like rooms inside of these exchanges where there's kind of a side tap where they get data from the cables that are literally traversing the entire world. So that's a bit concerning, because that means that like even at a global kind of level, you have like Five Eyes states collaborating with all of this data that they're getting directly from undersea cables to be able to provide like a global purview of the internet. And then, like a level down, autonomous systems can also work with each other to try and get a better view of things. But I think when we talk about global passive adversaries, we're usually talking about state level actors who are monitoring the direct lines of communication for the internet.
I think that's all I had.
Good stuff. Good question. Julian, go ahead.
Yeah, one question. Sorry, in case you already talked about it, but one question that came to my mind recently was if there is anything planned regarding the bigger open groups, which are currently relatively centralized on Session due to the server aspect of it. But personally, I could imagine something where, I obviously, it kind of like, I think part of the idea is that it's like expensive to run them, and that's why it's hard to integrate them. But could there be something like, I don't know, someone paying for a certain amount of volume, but having their group like hosted in a decentralized manner? And yeah,
there would be. I think it becomes kind of expensive at the bandwidth or rather the storage level, because you can imagine if you have 5,000 people in an open group and they're chatting fairly often, then that storage requirement on the service node network becomes quite high. And you also have 5,000 people polling for messages, and you could have many of these open groups as well. So I think the cost that you would need to compensate to the service node network to provide that service would be fairly high. I think right now the open group model makes quite a bit of sense for larger open groups, and it's something that other services are deploying as well. Like if you see Element and Matrix, they all have this idea of kind of like a home server where this is centrally hosted, but you get to choose which home server you belong to, right? So you can try and work out which person you trust, or if you don't trust anyone, you can host it yourself. But I think like usability wise, it would be way better to have this hosted on the service node network, because then people don't need to set up their own servers. They can just click one click and start up open groups and stuff. So I have thought about it, but I think the cost that the user would need to pay to set up something like this would be kind of a little bit more prohibitive, and may discourage the setup of more open groups that were like kind of decentralized.
But the question is kind of, I wouldn't see it as an either or. I think kind of I would more see it as like choose your fighter, right? I mean, like either set up your own server and host it yourself, but then also like pay for any kind of volume yourself. But on the other hand, like use our decentralized service, which may be suitable if for some reason you cannot host your own server. But then also that could be a revenue stream for the whole protocol in the sense, right?
Yeah, it's not actually a bad idea. Especially like, for example, maybe if you, like currently we have this swarm network where messages are replicated typically like 7 times to ensure that if a service node goes offline, you still have somewhere you can retrieve your message from. But if we lowered that level of replication down to like, say, 3 nodes, then our storage requirements would go way down. And then, yeah, maybe you could incentivize that smaller swarm of service nodes that were dealing with your open group directly. That could be a good idea, definitely. It's technically a bit complicated, but yeah, definitely an interesting idea.
All right, you're getting some good ideas in this room, man. Very, very productive. Hold on, I got Black Jesus. I'm adding you right now. Just for anybody who's listening, I put a link to Monerotopia.com in the nest up top. We're going to be having a conference in Mexico City. I'm assuming most people in this room have probably already heard about it. But Kee will be one of the speakers down there, along with some others from the team of Session and Oxen and Lokinet. And so check that out. Come down to Mexico City, hang out with us. If you can't make it, we're also selling a virtual conference ticket. And we just created a discount code you can use. I think we have Session or Oxen. Either of those you can type in. Yeah, you get 20% off. But yeah, if you can't make it, do the virtual conference, which is kind of cool. But we will eventually be posting all this in content for free. That's obviously all about getting out there. But to help finance the conference, and if you're looking to participate virtually, Q&A, kind of be in the chat rooms as the conference we are offering. Black Jesus, go ahead, man.
Yeah, Luke, can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
Okay. I just came on now, and I'm a big fan of Monerotopia, and my question is, Monerotopia is a big ecosystem on its own. So, what more are you guys, now I see we are approaching a bull market. So, what are you guys putting in place, like, to salvage the whole, or to take advantage of the whole situation?
What is Monerotopia taking advantage for potential upcoming growth? And if you could just rephrase the question just a little bit.
Okay, I mean, like, now Monerotopia is a big ecosystem on its own right now. It's a big project on its own. But my question is, let's say we are approaching. We need to be optimistic about this. We're approaching a bull market now. You understand? So, what is Monerotopia and their teams doing to salvage this bull market, to take advantage of this bull market? What are you guys doing?
Yeah. So you mean Monerotopia or the Monero cryptocurrency? I just want to make sure I understand.
Yeah, I'm talking about the Monero cryptocurrency in particular.
Okay. The Monero ecosystem is doing the same thing it's doing every day, whether or not we're on the brink of a bear market or a bull market, which is just improving the tech, trying to be more and more digital cash-like, right? With each iteration, constantly fighting the battle of maintaining privacy. And in addition to that, growing out the ecosystem and promoting the actual usage of Monero versus, for speculative purposes. So I think Monero does a good job as an ecosystem of just kind of always keeping its head down and building and promoting the use of the growth of usage, not so much speculation, not so much being worried about whether we're entering a bear market or a bull market, but promoting the actual usage so people actually using this stuff as digital cash, start transacting with it, start selling goods for it online and services, start creating apps around it that accept Monero. So I mean that's what the Monero project and is really focused on. And in terms of being ready for for more people to enter the network, I would say Monero is waiting and ready for users, for more users. I don't think there'd be any immediate issue there in terms of being able to handle more usage and more transaction count. I hope that answered your question. I'm not sure I entirely grasped it, but I hope I got it.
Yeah. You did. Yeah. So
all right,
thank you.
cool. Anybody else have a question related for Kee? And then we'll call this the last question if anybody's got. Julian or Danish, anything you guys want to round it out with? I know you guys seem to follow Oxen pretty closely. Any remaining questions?
Just thanks a lot for the space. It was really cool.
Awesome. Yeah, no, and thanks for bringing the really good questions. I think you guys gave Kee some good ideas here. Kee, man, thank you so much for doing the interview and then for sticking around for the spaces. Greatly appreciate it.
No, 100%. Love what you're doing here, Doug, and it's really excited to go to the conference.
I don't know if it's just me, but I can't hear Kee right now. Kee, are you talking?
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, he is. Apparently, you can't hear him. So if you're going to end the space, it's probably good enough.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Danish. Yeah.
But yeah.
I apologize, Kee, for not being able to hear you. But yeah, once again, thank you so much, man, for hanging out with us. Really excited to hang out with you in person down at Monerotopia. I will be buying you a drink down there, my man, for coming so far from the other side of the world to hang out with us at Monerotopia. To everybody else that's listening in, thanks for joining us, guys. See you again. We do these shows every week, these Monero Talk shows. We do them kind of on random days during the week, usually on a weeknight around 7 p.m. We interview different people in the Monero and privacy tech space. And then every Saturday at 11 a.m., we do the Monerotopia live show, which is a community-based show where people can jump on and speak their piece. And yeah, once again, Monerotopia.com for anybody that's interested in attending the conference, either in person or virtually. All right. Adios.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for joining us on this week's episode. We release new episodes every week. You can find and subscribe to our show on YouTube, Odyssey, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Go to Monerotalk.live to subscribe for a full list of places where you can watch and listen. If you want to interact with us, guests, or other podcast listeners, you can follow us on Twitter. And please leave us a review on iTunes. It helps people find the show, and we are always happy to read them. So thanks so much, and we look forward to being back next week.